They say Mars was the cradle of gods and graves alike. That beneath the red dust, in the shadow of titanic foundries, humanity made its second covenant with fire. Not the fire of Prometheus, but the fire of machines. Before the Imperium rose, before Horus fell, there was the Mechanicum, priests clad in bronze and steel, whispering Ben-Herit prayers into cogitators, treating schematics like scripture, oiling gears with the reverence of holy water. To them, every circuit had a soul, every weapon a spirit, every starship an altar that must be adored before it obeyed. But behind that reverence lay ambition, suspicion, and a hunger that gnawed at the roots of their faith. When the Emperor walked upon Mars, he did not come as a conqueror, but as a god unmasked. The Treaty of Mars, they called it, a pact written in fire and trust. The Emperor acknowledged their machine god, even dared to wear the mantle of omniscia, and in return, the forges of Mars opened their vaults, feeding the Great Crusade with titans, starships, and weapons wrought in sanctified steel. It was a marriage of necessity, a fragile union of reason and religion. For the Emperor saw knowledge as a tool, while the Martians saw it as divinity. To innovate was blasphemy, to question was heresy, and yet the Emperor's presence was undeniable, his power too vast to dismiss. For a time, they bent the knee, but even in those early years, there were fractures in the forge. Some magi whispered that the Emperor's claim was hollow, that the omniscia was still to come, not yet revealed. Others bowed too easily, too eagerly, to this new god, daring to think the machine's spirit and the Emperor one and the same. Seeds of suspicion took root. The Mechanicum had survived the age of strife by isolation, by secrecy, by hoarding knowledge in vaults while terror burned. To suddenly open those vaults to a golden figure from Earth was a wound to their pride. And beneath that pride lay a temptation older than any treaty, the hunger for forbidden knowledge. For what is more intoxicating to a tech priest than the forbidden? Even then, before the fires of heresy, the cult Mechanicus knew of artifacts they dared not touch. Standard template constructs corrupted by time, Xenotech hidden in vaults deeper than mountains, fragments of data souls that whispered in machine code older than man. The Emperor forbade their use. The Mechanicum agreed, outwardly, but in the privacy of their cathedrals, some magi prayed not for guidance, but for permission. And when permission did not come, they began to seek it elsewhere. The Pact of Mars, the sacred treaty, was a promise meant to unite flesh and machine, Terra and Mars. But promises, like circuits, corrode. The Emperor sought progress, a future unshackled by superstition. The Mechanicum sought preservation, a future chained to ritual. Between them was an ocean of silence, and in that silence, betrayal began to take shape. Tell me, what happens when the keepers of mankind's greatest knowledge decide that obedience is weakness? What happens when the priests of steel start listening, not to the Emperor, but to the whispers in the warp? This was the first fracture. This was the spark that would one day ignite the Dark Mechanicum, and the Red Planet, once the Emperor's ally, would become the forge of hell itself. Segment 2. Seeds of Heresy. They say temptation begins not with a roar, but with a whisper. For the Mechanicum, that whisper was the hum of forbidden engines buried deep beneath Martian rock, the faint echo of knowledge locked away by ancestors who had feared their own creations. The adepts called it tech heresy, but to others, it was revelation waiting to be uncovered. And on Mars, whispers spread like wildfire through steel corridors and data vaults. The cult Mechanicus had always claimed to serve the machine god, to guard the holy wisdom of standard template constructs, the STCs, relics of the dark age of technology. Yet the irony was cruel. They did not understand these relics. They worshipped them. They sang hymns to patterns they could no longer decipher. performed rituals to coax machines into life, and clothed ignorance in sacred liturgy. Progress was sin, preservation was law, and still, behind closed doors, certain magi grew restless. Among them were the ambitious, men like Kelbierhel, the fabricator general of Mars. He was no fool, no blind zealot. He saw in the Emperor's treaty both opportunity and insult. Terra had secured Mars' loyalty, but in doing so, Mars had bowed. For a world that believed itself the keeper of mankind's true divinity, to bend the knee to a mortal, even one claiming to be the Omniscia, was unbearable. Kelbierhal did not rage in public. He calculated in silence. It was not only pride that stoked rebellion. It was hunger. Deep in the vaults of Mars, fragments of alien devices lay dormant, harvested from fallen ships, from Xeno's ruins scattered across the stars. There were shards of psychoreactive crystals, bones of machines that breathed, engines that pulsed like hearts. Even stranger were the things pulled from the warp itself. Artifacts whose designs seemed to defy logic, whose surfaces twisted in ways the eye could not follow. The Emperor had forbidden their study. But Kelbierhal and his peers were not men bound by prohibitions. They were engineers of faith, but also of greed. They wanted to master what had been lost, even if it meant blasphemy. And so the seeds were sown in secret. Minor tech priests would be found dissecting Xeno's relics under layers of shielding, pretending to perform maintenance rituals. Servitors were discovered behaving strangely, feedback loops forming in lobotomized brains because some muggos had spliced alien code into their neural matrices. There were whispers of corrupted titans, their machine spirits howling not with loyalty, but with hunger. At first, these were dismissed as rumors, accidents, or isolated incidents. But to the watchful eye of the Emperor, they were patterns. He warned them, quietly, firmly. The line was clear. The Imperium could not tolerate innovation at the expense of humanity's soul. But warnings are useless to the ambitious. Kelbierhal was not content to remain Mars' fabricator general. He dreamed of being the Omniscia incarnate, the true voice of the machine god. And every prohibition from Terra only sharpened his resentment. It was then that the warp itself began to seep into their prayers. Some claimed to hear voices during rituals, not the binary chants of machine spirits, but whispers in languages older than man. Demons are patient tempters, and to the Mechanicum, they did not offer fleshly pleasures or mortal power. They offered something far more intoxicating: knowledge. Secrets of how to bind machine to soul, how to animate iron with true life, how to fuse mortal flesh with warp-born might. For a tech priest who saw the Emperor as a usurper, what greater god could there be than one who answered prayers with equations? Kelbierhal listened. Not openly, not yet, but he began to gather around him those who doubted Terra's pact, those who saw in chaos not corruption, but opportunity. Magi, forge lords, archdominuses, men and women who had bled themselves dry in pursuit of sacred fragments, only to find the Emperor's laws standing in their way. They began to whisper together, not of faith, of freedom. And freedom, for the Mechanicum, meant one thing: the ability to build without chains. The seeds of heresy were watered not only by ambition, but by the resentment of Terra's control. Every forge world beyond Mars, every satellite forge, every industrial powerhouse scattered across the stars was technically bound to the Fabricator General, and through him, to the Emperor. But the galaxy is vast, and distance breeds disobedience. Some forges already experimented in secret, creating machines that walked too fluidly, weapons that screamed with their own voices. Others trafficked with aliens and shadows, trading for technology forbidden by both Terra and Mars. When Kelbierhal began to gather his hidden court, he did not have to persuade them. He only had to offer them legitimacy. There was another reason for their growing resentment. The Emperor, for all his bargains, was no worshipper of the machine god. He tolerated their prayers, allowed their rituals, but he did not kneel with them. And that absence festered like rust. To many magi, it was proof that the Emperor was not the omniscient, merely an opportunist wearing the mask of divinity. They began to wait for a new revelation, a true God who would grant them what they sought. Not preservation, but apotheosis. It was during this time that the first true abominations were birthed. Machines that did not simply house machine spirits, but warp entities bound in circuitry. Demonic engines that breathe fire not because of fuel, but because of rage. War constructs whose pilots disappeared, only to emerge as part of the machine itself, their voices echoing from vox grills and tones warped beyond recognition. These creations were not yet unleashed upon the galaxy. They were hidden, tested in secret, worshipped by small cults of corrupted tech priests. But they existed, and once the Forbidden was born, it could not be forgotten. The seeds of heresy had sprouted. Mars had not yet burned, but the roots of rebellion dug deep into its bedrock. And all it would take was a storm, a voice strong enough, dark enough, to give Kelbier Hal and his followers the justification they needed to break their chains. That voice would come, not from Mars, but from the stars. It would come from the Emperor's favored son, Horus, and when it did, the red planet would bleed. Segment 3, the Horus Heresy Betrayal. They say the galaxy was broken not in thunder, but in whispers, and for Mars, those whispers carried the name of Horus, the War Master, the favored son of the Emperor, the brightest star of the Great Crusade. He did not march on the forges with legions at his back. He sent words first, words sharper than any blade, words that found fertile ground in the resentment already coiling through the Mechanicum. Kelbier Hal was waiting for such a voice. The Fabricator General had long since grown weary of Terra's leash, weary of bowing to an emperor who did not kneel before the machine god. When Horus spoke, he spoke to that wound. He did not demand loyalty. He offered recognition. He whispered to Kelbier Hal that Mars deserved to be free, that the Mechanicum had been enslaved to the Imperium's will, that the true Omnicia was not the Emperor at all. Horus promised power, respect, and above all, freedom to pursue knowledge without chains. Freedom, such a small word, and yet for the tech priests, it was intoxicating. No more restrictions. No more condemnation for innovation. No more treating STCs as sacred relics to be copied, but never altered. Under Horus, they could build as they wished. They could remake reality itself. And so Kelbier Hal listened. He weighed the offers of Terra against the promises of Horus. Terra gave only laws and restraint. Horus gave worship, alliance, and a chance to elevate Mars into the center of a new age. For a man already teetering on the edge of treason, it was no choice at all. Kelbier Hal bent the knee to the War Master. And in that moment, the Dark Mechanicum was born. Mars erupted. Civil war tore the red planet apart, and the sound of it was like no other war in the galaxy. It was not merely bolter fire and chain word screams. It was the thunder of titans turning their guns against their kin. It was void ships in Martian orbit annihilating each other with weapons meant to conquer stars. It was the very crust of the planet cracking as plasma reactors detonated and forges collapsed into molten seas. Loyalists fought desperately to hold the great forges, to protect the Emperor's dream of unity. But they were outnumbered, outmaneuvered. Kelbier Hal commanded not only armies of Skitarii and legions of war machines, but also the loyalty of entire Forge worlds. His betrayal sent shockwaves across the galaxy. Where Mars went, many followed. Those who remained true to the Emperor, magi who still believed in the pact, Forge temples that clung to loyalty, were butchered or driven into exile. Their sacred machines were seized, their knowledge corrupted. And on the ashes of that slaughter, Kelbier Hal, declared Mars for Horus. The Dark Mechanicum now stood beside the traitor legions. It was not enough to betray, however. They had to create. The first true demon engines were unleashed during those days. Machines fused with warp spawn, constructs of iron and flesh. Their spirits no longer the obedient machine wraiths of loyal forges, but demons bound in chains of circuitry. Hellwalkers stalked the Martian wastes. Titans howled with voices that were not human, their machine spirits enslaved to chaos. Weapons once sanctified with prayer now screamed with living malice when fired. The Emperor's dream of a united humanity shattered in that moment. For the Mechanicum, the pact was broken. Those who remained loyal to the throne reforged themselves as the Adeptus Mechanicus, swearing themselves fully to Terra. But Kelbier Hal and his corrupted kin embraced their new path. They were no longer the guardians of knowledge. They had become its butchers. The Horus Heresy did not merely split legions and brothers. It split the very soul of Mars. From that sundered forge came two reflections, one bound in ritual, clinging to ancient laws, terrified of change, the Adeptus Mechanicus, and one that abandoned restraint altogether, throwing open the gates to chaos and mutation, the Dark Mechanicum. The civil war on Mars was not the end. It was only the beginning. For when Horus marched against the Emperor, it was the forges of the Dark Mechanicum that armed him. It was their titans that strode alongside traitor Astartes, their weapons that burned loyal worlds, their ships that split imperial fleets apart. And as the stars fell to war, Kelbier Hal smiled, for his betrayal had given him everything he desired: freedom. Freedom to build blasphemies the galaxy had never seen. Freedom to turn prayer into pact, machine into monster, and Mars into a forge of damnation. Tell me, what is more terrifying, a demon born of hell or a demon born of steel? The Dark Mechanicum had chosen both. Segment 4. Blasphemous Creations. They say war is the mother of invention. For the Dark Mechanicum, war became the mother of abomination. Once Kelbier Hal had cast aside the chains of Terra, once Mars burned and the forges screamed in chaos tongues, the tech priests of hell no longer saw machines as tools to be preserved, nor as relics to be worshipped. They saw them as vessels, hollow shells waiting to be filled with something far darker. The first creations were crude, almost accidental. A plasma reactor that had warped under demon touch refused to shut down, its machine spirit replaced with something that laughed in frequencies no human ear could endure. Skitarii corpses were dragged back to the forge and rebuilt with demon ichor, their limbs replaced by weapon limbs that dripped molten warp fire. Titans once bound by sacred rite were reawakened with new masters whispering inside their vox boxes. Not machine spirits, but shrieking demons of corn and slainish. But crude quickly gave way to deliberate. The Magi of the Dark Mechanicum learned that rituals of the warp could do what no cogitator ever could: imbue steel with hunger, make weapons thirst for blood, turn engines into predators. They began to summon demons, not to banish them, but to bargain with them. Where the loyal Mechanicus anointed machines with oil and liturgy, the Dark Mechanicum anointed them with blood. Where the Adeptus Mechanicus whispered to machine spirits for obedience, the Dark Mechanicum chained demons for dominance. It was here the true demon engines were born. The Defiler, a walking monstrosity of steel and claw, fused with the soul of a bound warp entity, its body a spider of iron and cannons. The Helldrake, forged from twisted aerospace hulls and possessed by demons, became living predators that shrieked across battlefields, their metallic wings tearing the skies as they hunted prey like raptors. The Mauler Fiend, a beast of engines and fury, was unleashed, tearing apart loyalist lines with jaws that dripped molten warp flame. These were not machines. These were not demons. They were both, blasphemous marriages of technology and chaos, each one a heresy against both logic and nature. The Dark Mechanicum's forges became hell furnaces, known as hell forges, worlds twisted by warp storms, their skies black with smog, their rivers running with toxic oils. Factories thrummed not with hymns, but with screaming. To walk through one was to hear the clang of iron drowned by the roar of caged demons, bound in circuitry, begging for release or laughing at madness. Servitors stumbled through corridors, not lobotomized slaves, but half-demon, half-machine horrors whose every step dripped corruption into the ground. On these worlds, tech priests ceased to be human at all, their flesh twisted, not merely by augmentation, but by chaos itself. Some sprouted limbs of living iron. Others fused entirely with their creations, their human forms devoured within engines, their minds spread across networks of demon code. They became more than priests, less than men, living conduits for the blasphemy of their creations. It was not only weapons they built. They corrupted knowledge itself. Where the Adeptus Mechanicus had preserved STC fragments, the Dark Mechanicum desecrated them, rewriting their patterns with warp sorcery. Guns were remade to whisper to their users in dreams. Armor was forged that bled like skin when pierced. Even data itself was infected. Machine code that carried demonic viruses, cogitators that, once activated, opened warp portals instead of calculations. Their philosophy became simple. If the flesh could be possessed by demons, so too could the machine. And why should it not? To them, the machine spirit had always been a mystery. The Dark Mechanicum simply declared the mystery solved. The spirits were demons, and binding them was the true art of the omnisia. This philosophy spread with fire. Soon, entire war hosts of demon engines marched beside the traitor legions. The sons of Horus thundered into battle alongside corrupted titans that shrieked with demonic hunger. World Eaters unleashed mauler fiends that mirrored their own rage. The Emperor's children soared with helldrakes that echoed their twisted beauty. And the word-bearers, ever the priests of chaos, sang hymns over demon engines as though they were holy icons, praising the Dark Mechanicum as prophets of a new gospel of steel and sin. It is said that during the siege of Terra itself, the walls of the imperial palace shook beneath the roar of Dark Mechanicum creations. Titans that had once fought in the Emperor's name now howled in chaos's glory. The skies above the palace burned as helldrakes rained fire. And through it all, the Dark Magi chanted their binary heresies, fusing sorcery and circuitry, mockeries of the rituals once spoken on Mars. But there is a truth, darker still. Not every demon engine obeyed. Not every binding held. There were machines that turned on their masters, consuming the tech priests who had summoned them, dragging their creators into their own metallic carcasses, fusing flesh and machine in eternal torment. The Dark Mechanicum did not flinch. To them, such failures were not tragedies. They were data. They learned from every horror, refining their rituals until damnation itself could be engineered with precision. And so the galaxy changed forever. No longer was war a contest of steel against steel, flesh against flesh. The Dark Mechanicum had introduced something new. War where every weapon had a soul, and every soul hungered for ruin. Tell me, what hope does a man have against a gun that hates him? Against armor that whispers for his death? Against a machine that bleeds, breathes, and prays to gods older than stars? The Dark Mechanicum did not just betray the Emperor. They betrayed the very meaning of machine. Segment 5. Dark versus Loyalist Split. They say Mars is a graveyard of gods, not only for the machines that died there, but for the faiths that were betrayed. For when Kelbierhal pledged himself to Horus, when demon engines first stalked the forge halls, the soul of Mars itself split in two. The war was not swift. It was long grinding catastrophic. Titans clashed in the Martian plains, their steps shaking continents. Forge against forge, manufactorum against manufactorum, Scutarii legions slaughtering their own kin in symmetrical massacres. One half of Mars cried out for the Emperor, for the sanctity of the treaty. The other half sang hymns to chaos, praising the dark gods who had finally answered their binary prayers. And so, under a sky blackened by burning reactors, the schism of Mars was born. Those who remained true to Terra called themselves the Mechanicus Loyalists. They saw in the Emperor not merely a tyrant from Earth, but a shield against damnation. To them, the Dark Mechanicum's blasphemies were not innovation, but rot, proof that unchained knowledge leads only to ruin. They fled into exile where they could, retreating to loyalist fleets, hiding in underground vaults, or fortifying isolated forges. Some, like the Forge Lords of Ryza and Lucius, swore themselves irrevocably to Terra, vowing never again to let Mars' pride shatter the union of flesh and machine. And it was these survivors, these faithful who endured fire and betrayal, who would one day emerge as the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Emperor's chosen custodians of technology. It was not merely a name change. It was a scar, a permanent reminder that they had nearly lost everything to their own hubris. In time, their rituals grew stricter, their liturgies harsher, their superstition thicker. Innovation was strangled even further, not out of piety alone, but out of fear. Fear that curiosity would once again open the gate to chaos. Fear that Mars' betrayal might be repeated. On the other side stood the Dark Mechanicum. They did not see themselves as traitors. They saw themselves as liberated. Where their loyalist kin preserved, they created. Where their kin whispered to machine spirits, they bound demons. Where the Adeptus Mechanicus clung to the Emperor's distant throne, the Dark Mechanicum bent, knee only to chaos and to their own ambition. They abandoned the Red Planet after the heresy's fires dimmed, fleeing into the Eye of Terror, where their hellforges could thrive without restraint. To them, the schism was not a wound. It was rebirth. The irony is cruel. Both sides declared themselves the true heirs of the machine god. Both saw the other as blasphemous, as heretical, as lost. Yet both worshipped the same principle, knowledge sanctified. The Adeptus Mechanicus sanctified the past. The Dark Mechanicum sanctified the future, and between them lay only ashes. The division was not only spiritual, it was practical. With the schism, the Imperium lost half its industrial heart in a single breath. Thousands of Forge worlds followed Kelbier into damnation, delivering their titanic war machines, starships, and weapons to Horus. Others remained loyal, but scarred, weakened, barely able to feed the Emperor's armies. It was a wound from which the Imperium never truly recovered. Even in the 41st millennium, the Adeptus Mechanicus struggles to maintain what was lost in those few years of fire. And yet, both sides endured. The Adeptus Mechanicus rebuilt under the Emperor's shadow, bound now more tightly than ever to Terra. The Dark Mechanicum thrived in the Eye, forging monstrosities in demon-haunted worlds where reality itself bent to their will. Their split was eternal. Neither could ever destroy the other, for they were twins, mirror reflections of the same obsession. In the Siege of Terra, the split was plain to see. On one side, loyal Titans and Ordinatus engines fought to the death to hold the walls of the Imperial Palace. On the other, corrupted Titans howled with demonic voices as they pounded those same walls. Scutarii legions slaughtered each other beneath banners of Mars, their binary screams echoing in unison across the void. Mars had fractured, and through that fracture the galaxy bled. When the heresy ended, when Horus lay broken and the War Master's dream shattered, Mars was no longer the same world. Kelbierhal vanished into the eye with his disciples, his forges, and his blasphemies. The loyalists remained, scarred but resolute, reforging themselves as the Adeptus Mechanicus, vowing that the schism would never be forgotten. But the truth is this: Mars itself never healed. Even in the 41st millennium, beneath the hymns of the loyal Mechanicus, there are whispers. Whispers that in the deep vaults, in sealed cathedrals beneath the dust, the Dark Mechanicum still lingers. That even on the Red Planet, the seeds of heresy never truly died. And so, the Imperium fights not only against Xenos, against demons, against time itself. It fights against its own reflection. The Dark Mechanicum is the shadow of Mars, and shadows are not so easily banished. Tell me, what is more tragic? That the Emperor's dream of unity was broken by pride? Or that the very guardians of mankind's knowledge became its most faithful betrayers? This was the true sin of Mars. Not that it split, but that in its splitting, it revealed a truth the Imperium could never bury. That faith and knowledge, once twisted, can never be separated again. Segment 6. The Heresies Forge Worlds. They say wars are not won by courage alone, but by the furnaces that feed them. For Horus and his traitors, those furnaces burned with a new and terrible fire, the fire of the Dark Mechanicum. Once Mars had fallen into civil war. Once Kelbierhal pledged his loyalty to the War Master. The Forge Worlds beyond the Red Planet began to choose their sides. And many chose treason. It was not simply allegiance. It was survival, ambition, or greed. Forge Worlds scattered across the stars heard Horus call and saw opportunity. No longer bound to Terra strictures, they could indulge in forbidden research, reawaken long-buried designs, fuse warp sorcery with iron. Where the Adeptus Mechanicus clung to ritual and preservation, the Dark Mechanicum embraced creation without chains. And so, entire worlds became factories of blasphemy. Take Istvan. When the first great betrayal struck, when the legions loyal to Horus purged their brothers in fire and orbital bombardment, it was not only Astartes who bled. The Dark Mechanicum was there, supplying the War Master's armies with cursed war machines, demon-infused engines, and weapons that whispered in the dark. The massacre of Istvan V was remembered as betrayal among the legions, but behind the lines, the Mechanicum too had declared their treachery. For every bolter fired, every titan that strode the blackened battlefield, there were forges deep in chaos-held territory feeding the slaughter. At Kolth, the Ultramarines fought not only the word-bearers, but the shadows of the Dark Mechanicum. Warp-tainted reactors poisoned the void. Warships armed with corrupted plasma batteries vomited fire that should not exist. Viruses, crafted not by Nurgle, but by tech priests enthralled to him, swept through ships like plagues of iron, melting circuits and boiling the blood of crewmen in tandem. Kolth's orbital war was as much a duel of machines as of men. And at Terra itself, when the palace walls shook beneath the War Master's final assault, it was not only the traitor legions who pressed against the Emperor's defenses. The Dark Mechanicum was there in force. Titans, once proud engines of Mars, now howled with demon voices as they battered the Eternity Gate. Demon engines clawed across the plains, fusing sorcery and steel in forms too hideous to be named. And deep within the War Master's arsenal, the forges of the Dark Mechanicum built weapons that rivaled even the Emperor's might. It was not only Mars. Forge worlds across the galaxy burned. Xana, once a shadowed industrial world, pledged itself to Horus and became infamous for the hell forges it raised. Cyclothrave, a forge of heretics, joined willingly, its tech priests long since dabbling in warp alchemy. Estaban III, and countless others, bled into the Dark Mechanicum's grip. Each one added their output to the tide of heresy. Each one birthed new monstrosities. The Imperium, even as it struggled against Horus armies, knew the cost of this betrayal. For every loyal forge, there was another lost. For every titan that strode in the Emperor's name, another turned its guns upon him. The Dark Mechanicum had doubled the strength of the traitors, feeding them cursed titans, demon warships, weapons that did not merely kill but corrupted, rotted, damned. Kelbierhal himself became more than fabricator general. He became a prophet of blasphemy. From the forges of Mars he sent orders and rituals, binary chants laced with warp sorcery, binding the Dark Mechanicum together as an order unto itself. No longer merely servants of the machine god, they were now priests of the union between demon and steel. They declared that the machine spirit was no metaphor, but literal truth, that demons were the true animating essence of the universe. And their forges echoed with screams to prove it. The heresy would not have lasted without them. Horus armies marched on loyalist blood. Yes, but their weapons, their engines, their very supply lines were fed by the Dark Mechanicum. While the Emperor's forces bled and rationed every bolter round, the traitors wielded an endless tide of cursed munitions. Where the Adeptus Mechanicus clung to rites of preservation, the Dark Mechanicum created endlessly, recklessly, birthing horrors faster than they could be destroyed. It was not victory they gave Horus, but momentum. They gave him the means to break the Imperium's spine, and in doing so, they damned themselves forever. For when the heresy ended, when Horus fell beneath the Emperor's hand, there would be no path back. The Adeptus Mechanicus survived, battered, bloodied, but bound forever to Terra. The Dark Mechanicum fled into the Eye of Terror, dragging their hellforges into the warp, their demonic creations in tow. But during the heresy, they were not outcasts. They were partners. They were architects of destruction. The Imperium remembers Horus' betrayal, the fall of half the Primarchs, the slaughter of brothers upon brothers. But just as damning, just as catastrophic, was the betrayal of Mars. Without the Dark Mechanicum, Horus could never have made war upon Terra. Without their cursed forges, the heresy would have burned itself out long before it reached the throne. The galaxy remembers Horus as the arch-traitor. But behind him stood Kelbierhal, the fabricator general who sold Mars to chaos. A man who turned prayers into chains, and chains into monsters. His legacy was not only destruction. His legacy was permanence. For the Dark Mechanicum did not die when Horus did. They endured. They fled into the Eye. And there, in realms where reality bends and demons breathe, they built something worse than treason. They built eternity. Segment 7. Life in the Eye of Terror. They say exile breaks the weak, but for the Dark Mechanicum, exile was liberation. When the heresy ended in fire and ash, when Horus lay broken and the traitor legions fled into the warp, the Dark Mechanicum did not die on the battlefield. They carried their hellforges with them into the Eye of Terror, into realms where physics bent, where reality screamed, where demons breathed the air and time itself twisted like molten metal. And there, in the heart of damnation, they thrived. A forge world in the Imperium is a cathedral of order. Its manufactoria follow sacred rhythms. Its rites preserve machines unchanged for millennia. But a hell forge within the Eye is something altogether different. Imagine a factory built not on stone or steel, but on flesh that grows and pulses. Imagine smokestacks that howl with demon voices instead of steam. Imagine a foundry floor where iron is poured not by mortal hands, but by bound warp creatures dragging chains through rivers of molten hatred. These were the hell forges, the children of Mars' betrayal, the industrial heart of chaos. Here, the tech priests of the Dark Mechanicum remade themselves beyond recognition. No longer bound by the thin strands of humanity that clung to their loyalist cousins, they gave themselves fully to the fusion of flesh, machine, and warp. Some no longer had faces at all, their skulls stretched into vox grills that screamed Benheric invocations. Others abandoned physical form entirely, existing only as data ghosts chained to demon engines. There were magi whose torsos were fused into tanks that wept ichor, arch-heretics who had multiple minds stitched across different bodies, and dominuses who became little more than cables of nerve and steel, their flesh spread across their forges like a colony of parasites. But even these abominations were not free. They had entered the Eye on the condition of their servitude. For the chaos god demand price for every gift. Every demon bound into a machine demanded flesh in return. Every hell forge that thrived was paid for in sacrifice. The lives of slaves, the souls of adepts, the essence of the tech priests themselves. They were no longer masters of the machine. They had become partners in damnation, bargaining daily with gods who did not know mercy. And yet, in this bargain, they flourished. Hellforges like Xanadu and Sarum became infamous across the galaxy, birthing engines of war the Imperium could not fathom. These worlds became laboratories of blasphemy, where no idea was forbidden, where genetic corruption, warp sorcery, and machine code merged into singular monstrosities. The Scutarii of the loyalist Mechanicus are legions of uniform precision, cyborg soldiers reduced to perfect obedience. But the dark Scutarii of the Hellforges are something far worse. They are not uniform. They are not predictable. Some march with demon faces grafted onto steel skulls. Others bear limbs that twitch and convulse with a life of their own, as though possessed. Entire cohorts are built not for efficiency, but for spectacle. Legions of screaming, writhing abominations whose very presence terrifies loyal troops before a shot is fired. The machines of the Dark Mechanicum are no longer machines. Their titans are no longer titans. In the Eye, warlord-class engines of war are not armored with steel, but with flesh that heals, stitched with veins of molten warp fire. Their reactors throb like hearts, pumping not plasma, but ichor. Pilots within these machines are not controllers. They are prisoners, fused into the machine's essence, their minds shattered into voices that echo from vox horns in distorted madness. Some walk battlefields, screaming the names of their tormentors. Others howl prayers to gods who will never answer. Every hellforge is a shrine, every weapon an idol, every abomination a sermon. For the Dark Mechanicum no longer believes in knowledge alone. They believe in communion. To them, the act of binding a demon into a weapon is a form of worship, a sacrament that proves the machine god and the chaos gods are one and the same. And so, within the Eye, they built not only for themselves, but for chaos. When Abaddon called for his first Black Crusade, it was the Dark Mechanicum who armed him. When the traitor legions sought to replenish their broken fleets, it was the Hellforges who provided. When demon princes demanded gifts of iron and flesh, it was the tech priests of hell who crafted them with a zeal that bordered on rapture. They had become essential. The traitor legions could not wage war without them. But life in the Eye is never stable. Rivalries fester. Forge fights forge. Muggos devours Muggos. Not even the Dark Mechanicum is united. Each Hellforge is a kingdom unto itself, ruled by archmagos whose loyalty is measured not by oath but by fear. They barter with demons. They plot against one another. They build war machines not only to fight the Imperium, but to annihilate rival Hellforges. Theirs is a unity of necessity, held together only by the demands of the long war and the iron will of Abaddon. And still they endure. For while the Imperium rots in stagnation, the Dark Mechanicum creates, not wisely, not safely, not sanely, but endlessly. To live in the Eye of Terror is to live where time has no meaning, where centuries pass like seconds and seconds can last lifetimes. In such a crucible, invention becomes mutation, mutation becomes innovation, and innovation becomes horror. Tell me, what empire could hope to stand against such industry? An imperium that fears change, shackled by its own superstition? Or an empire that embraces damnation, that fuses God and machine into one screaming entity? The Dark Mechanicum chose damnation, and in doing so, they built eternity. Segment 8. The Long War Legacy. They say the heresy ended at Terra, but for the Dark Mechanicum, the war never ended. It simply changed shape. When Horus fell beneath the Emperor's hand, when the traitor legions scattered like ashes into the warp, the Dark Mechanicum fled with them, dragging their hell forges into the Eye of Terror. And there, in exile, they made a vow, not in words, but in iron. They would never stop building, never stop corrupting, never stop feeding chaos. This vow became their legacy, the Long War. 10,000 years of endless defiance, not only against the Imperium, but against the very idea of stasis, where the Adeptus Mechanicus bound itself to preservation, strangled by fear of innovation. The Dark Mechanicum exulted in change. They were the beating heart of chaos industry, the forges that turned raw hatred into weapons of war. Without them, the traitor legions would have withered in the eye. With them, they became eternal. It was the Dark Mechanicum that armed Abaddon the Despoiler. When he declared his first Black Crusade, it was the Hellforges that poured out war machines to his banner. The Black Legion ships were not merely repaired. They were remade, fitted with demon reactors, armed with weapons that screamed when fired. Their Titans marched once more, rebuilt in forms unrecognizable, half demon, half machine, their machine spirits silenced, replaced with bound warp entities. Each Black Crusade that followed was written in their labor. The second, the third, all 13. Every time Abaddon marched upon the galaxy, it was the Dark Mechanicum that armed him. It was they who provided the endless tide of demon engines, the endless fleets of warships, the endless chains of weapons that fed chaos hunger. Their Hellforges bled iron into the Long War, decade after decade, millennium after millennium. But they were not merely servants. They were partners, rivals, manipulators. Abaddon relied upon them, but he did not command them. The Dark Mechanicum served chaos first, the War Master second. Their loyalty was transactional, a bargain struck anew with every crusade. They supplied his armies because he was the greatest engine of war chaos possessed. But in their secret vaults, they pursued their own visions. The creation of new demon engines, the fusion of man, machine, and warp into forms too horrific for even the traitor legions to endure. The warp smiths of the Chaos Legions, those dark reflections of the Tech Marines, were their children, their emissaries. Trained in Hellforges, they strode the battlefields of the Long War as priests of damnation, binding demons into engines, repairing monstrosities with sorcery and steel. They were not engineers. They were sorcerers of circuitry, prophets of fusion, the bridge between Chaos Space Marines and the Dark Mechanicum that birthed their weapons. Where a loyal Tech Marine anoints his machines with sacred oils, a warpsmith flays the skin of slaves across reactor cores, chanting binary liturgies woven with demonic names. The Long War gave them purpose, but also fed their rivalries. The Hellforges are not united. They squabble, betray, annihilate one another. Forge lords of Xana plotting against Sarum. Arch-heretics scheming to usurp one another with new inventions of blasphemy. Some worship Khorne and build only engines of bloodshed. Others dedicate themselves to Tsench, birthing weapons that warp reality itself. Still others bend knee to Nurgle or Slainish, their creations dripping with rot or pleasure-twisted torment. And some serve no god at all, believing only in the sanctity of fusion, of demon and machine as the one true divinity. Yet for all their rivalries, they are bound by necessity. The long war demands fuel. Chaos cannot fight the Imperium with sorcery alone. It requires ships, titans, weapons, armor, an industrial engine equal to that of the Imperium itself. And so, even as they plot and betray, the Dark Mechanicum always return to the furnaces, always feed the forges, always deliver their nightmares to the battlefield. The Imperium knows this. The Inquisition whispers that if the Dark Mechanicum could be destroyed, if their hell forges could be annihilated, the long war itself would wither. The traitor legions would be starved of war machines, forced to rely on dwindling relics. But the Eye of Terror is vast. Its forges are hidden in storms of unreality, in demon worlds where time runs sideways, in black suns that devour fleets whole. To strike them is nearly impossible, and so the Dark Mechanicum endures, untouchable, eternal, feeding the long war with every cursed creation. But there is an irony here. For the Adeptus Mechanicus, stagnation is death. For the Dark Mechanicum, change is survival. And in 10,000 years of war, it is they who have evolved, while the loyal Mechanicus has calcified. The Adeptus Mechanicus repairs and preserves ancient titans, ancient ships, ancient weapons. The Dark Mechanicum builds new ones, endlessly, blasphemously. Their creations may be unstable, uncontrollable, but they are new. And in the galaxy of 40K, new is the most dangerous heresy of all. Tell me, who truly serves the machine god? The adepts who whisper prayers to rusting relics, afraid to alter a single cog? Or the heretics who fuse gods and machines, who dare to create in defiance of all law? The Imperium calls them monsters. The Dark Mechanicum calls them visionaries. And the long war marches on, fed by their furnaces, as the galaxy drowns in steel and demon fire. This is their legacy, 10,000 years of betrayal made eternal. The long war is their sermon. The Black Crusades are their hymns. And every demon engine that stalks the battlefield is their prayer made manifest. Segment 9. Unique Technology and Abominations. They say the Adeptus Mechanicus preserves humanity's past. The Dark Mechanicum, by contrast, creates its nightmares. If the long war is their eternal hymn, then their machines are its verses, each a blasphemy of steel and demon, each a rejection of the natural order. To walk among the arsenals of the Dark Mechanicum is to witness not industry, but a zoo of horrors, each weapon alive, each machine thirsting. The Defiler was one of their first true masterpieces, a demon engine designed for siege. It is a crawling monstrosity, part spider, part tank, bristling with cannons and claws. Where loyal artillery must be loaded, tended, and aimed, the Defiler moves of its own accord, seeking prey with the hunger of its bound demon. It scuttles across battlefields with unnatural speed, lobbing shells that howl as they fly, as though the demon's own voice is carried on the shrapnel. Its claws are no mere tools. They are the demon's own limbs, rending flesh, steel, even ceramite as though it were parchment. To face a Defiler is to face not a machine of war, but a predator born in iron. Above them scream the Helldrakes, demon-forged aircraft that hunt like carrion birds. Their wings are metallic membranes that twist against physics, allowing them to shriek through the air with impossible agility. Their cockpits do not house pilots. Instead, they are hollow shells possessed by warp entities that see through metal eyes, their vox grills spewing the howls of the damned as they dive. When they breathe fire, it is not promethium, it is warp flame, a hunger that clings to flesh and soul alike. Loyal Astartes tell stories of Helldrakes locking on a prey and stalking them for hours, circling overhead, shrieking, before descending like vultures to tear them apart with talons sharp as chain blades. And then there are the Mauler fiends. Where the Defiler is built for destruction at range, the Mauler Fiend is built for fury. It is little more than a bound demon encased in an armored chassis, sprinting across battlefields on piston legs, its jaws dripping molten steel, its fists ending in drills and chains. When unleashed, it slams into lines of tanks, tearing them apart as if they were paper. Infantry do not fight Mauler Fiends. They scatter, because to be caught in its path is to be consumed whole. It does not think. It does not aim. It simply kills until its demon soul burns out in ecstasy. These are but the most infamous. The Hellforge's team, with infinite variations. Some demon engines slither like serpents, their bodies chains of interlocking steel vertebrae, vomiting warp flame as they coil around prey. Others stride like knights, mockeries of imperial war machines, their lances dripping blood, their banners made of human skin. Entire Titan legions have been reborn within the eye, corrupted beyond recognition. Loyalist warlords become shadowed horrors, plated with living flesh, their reactors powered not by plasma, but by demon hearts. Their crews are not controllers, but sacrifices, wired into the machine until their screams become its language. It is not only engines of war. The Dark Mechanicum builds weapons of every size, each more abominable than the last. Rifles whose barrels writhe like snakes, blades that drip ichor, whispering in voices only their wielder can hear. Armor that fuses to its wearer's skin, feeding off their blood, healing them even as it drinks them dry. In their hell forges, there are no limits. Every act of creation is also an act of corruption. Where the Adeptus Mechanicus maintains the purity of STCs, the Dark Mechanicum rewrites them. They infect data with demonic viruses, turning sacred patterns into heretical blueprints. An STC fragment once capable of producing a power sword might, in their hands, yield a blade that bleeds when drawn, that screams when swung, that hungers for souls. To the Dark Mechanicum, this is not sacrilege. It is evolution. Their abominations do not stop with machines. Flesh itself is a canvas. Heretic genitors splice human slaves with cybernetics, not for efficiency, but for spectacle. Warriors with too many limbs, each replaced by a different weapon. Servitors whose brains have been replaced with demon shards. Entire cults of living weapons, built not to endure war, but to glorify the fusion of warp and machine. To witness one of these creations is to see philosophy made flesh, the rejection of order, the embrace of mutation. And still, the question lingers, do these things serve their masters, or do their masters serve them? Every demon engine is a bargain. Every abomination requires binding, chains, rituals, endless vigilance. And yet, many within the Dark Mechanicum whisper that this is the truth of the universe, that no machine is truly soulless, that all engines crave, that all technology is alive. Where the Adeptus Mechanicus claims the machine spirit is metaphor, the Dark Mechanicum proclaims it is literal, and those spirits are demons. This belief defines them. It drives every act of creation, every experiment, every forge fire lit in the eye. To bind a demon into a machine is not mere utility. It is theology. It is their proof that they, not the Adeptus Mechanicus, are the true heirs of knowledge. Tell me, then, what is more heretical? To chain a demon inside a gun until it screams with every shot, or to pretend the gun has no soul at all? The Imperium calls them monsters. The Dark Mechanicum calls themselves visionaries. And somewhere between the screams of their abominations, a terrible truth lingers. Perhaps both are right. Segment 10. The Philosophical Corruption. They say heresy begins not in the forge, but in the mind. The Dark Mechanicum did not fall because of a single betrayal, nor because of hunger for power alone. They fell because of philosophy, because they chose to believe in something that twisted truth into blasphemy and blasphemy into truth. For the loyal Adeptus Mechanicus, the machine spirit is both metaphor and faith. Every engine, every cogitator, every weapon is said to have a spirit within, a fragment of divinity to be appeased by ritual and liturgy. But to most magi, this is a convenient fiction, a religious language wrapped around the preservation of ancient science. The machine spirit is a symbol, not a literal soul, or so the loyalists would claim. The Dark Mechanicum rejected that illusion. They declared that the machine spirit is not a metaphor. It is real. It is demon. To them, every machine is a vessel, every engine a hollow body waiting to be filled. Where their loyalist kin pray to appease, they summon to possess. They see no difference between binding a demon into a tank and coaxing a reactor back to life. Both are communion. Both are worship. This belief is not madness to them. It is clarity. The universe is alive, they say. The warp is not a curse. It is the source. To deny it is to deny reality. If a demon can inhabit flesh, why not steel? If a soul can be corrupted, why not circuitry? To the Dark Mechanicum, there is no division between matter and spirit, no distinction between machine and God. All things are vessels. All things are souls waiting to be chained. And here lies the irony. In their own twisted way, they see themselves as faithful. The Adeptus Mechanicus clings to the Emperor's pact, worshipping the Omniscia in rigid superstition. But the Dark Mechanicum believes they are the true heirs of the machine god. They argue that the loyalists stagnate, fearing innovation, strangling discovery with ritual. They claim the Dark Mechanicum alone embraces the full truth of divinity. That knowledge is mutation, and mutation is sacred. Their philosophy is not simply corruption. It is inversion. Where the Adeptus Mechanicus seeks order, the Dark Mechanicum exalts in chaos. Where the Adeptus worships the past, the Dark Mechanicum glorifies the future, no matter how monstrous. Where the Adeptus preserves, the Dark Mechanicum transforms. To them, stasis is death, and life, true life, exists only in change. Consider their view of humanity itself. The loyal Mechanicus reveres flesh as flawed, weak, a prison to be discarded for the purity of steel. The Dark Mechanicum agrees, but takes it further. Flesh is not only flawed, it is unfinished. It is clay to be reshaped. Augmentation is not enough. Flesh must be fused with warp, with demon, with machine, until something new is born. Something stronger. Something eternal. There are heretic manifestos that survive only in fragments, stolen from the eye, smuggled through inquisitorial hands. They whisper of the Dark Mechanicum's creed. The soul is data. The demon is energy. The machine is vessel. Combine them, and divinity is achieved. It is not science. It is not religion. It is both blasphemously merged. And yet, perhaps the most haunting aspect of their philosophy is this. It works. Demon engines march. Hell forges produce. Warp-bound circuitry functions. Their theology is not mere delusion. It has proof, walking, screaming proof. Every helldrake, every defiler, every cursed titan is evidence that their philosophy is not only belief, but praxis. The Imperium calls them damned, but the Dark Mechanicum calls themselves enlightened. They say the Adeptus Mechanicus fears the truth because it reveals their faith as a cage. The Adeptus chants to rusting relics. The Dark Mechanicum wields living gods in chains. This corruption is not just theological, it is existential. For it poses a question the Imperium cannot answer. What if the Dark Mechanicum is right? What if every machine is a soul waiting to be filled? What if the very stars hum with voices we dare not hear? To the Dark Mechanicum, the Imperium is a fossil, a relic chained to the corpse of the Emperor. They see themselves as the future, the only ones who dare to step forward into evolution. In their eyes, they are not betrayers. They are builders. They are visionaries. They are priests of a machine god that does not slumber, but hungers. Tell me, then, what is more dangerous in this galaxy? The fanatic who believes in lies, or the heretic who believes in truths too terrible to face? The Dark Mechanicum has answered that question with fire and steel. Their philosophy is not madness to them. It is faith, and faith in the 41st millennium can shatter worlds. Segment 11. Modern day, 41st to 42nd millennium. They say the heresy was 10,000 years ago. They say Mars was cleansed, that the Dark Mechanicum was driven into exile, broken and scattered. But listen closely to the battlefields of the present age, and you will hear their machines screaming still. The Dark Mechanicum has not vanished. It has endured, and in the 41st millennium, it is more vital to chaos than it has ever been. For every Black Crusade, for every war band that sails from the Eye of Terror, the Dark Mechanicum is there. Their hellforges still burn in the warp, still belching out demon engines, still binding demons into steel. Abaddon himself, the despoiler, has waged 13 great crusades against the Imperium, and in every one of them, the Dark Mechanicum has been his beating heart. Their warpsmiths march beside him. Their forges feed his fleets. Their engines of abomination stride at his command. Without them, the Black Legion would be nothing but bitter warriors wielding relics long since crumbled to dust. With them, they are eternal. And now, in the age of the Great Rift, their influence is greater still. The cicatrix maledictum splits the galaxy in two, a wound that bleeds endless demons into reality. The Imperium is fractured, half in shadow, half in light. Supply lines are shattered. Faith is failing. The throne itself flickers. But for the Dark Mechanicum, this is opportunity. Warp storms are not obstacles to them. They are highways. Where Imperial fleets falter, the Hellforges thrive. Where worlds are cut off from Terra's light, the Dark Mechanicum descends, offering salvation in the form of machines that whisper and burn. Entire systems, abandoned by the Imperium, now forge weapons for chaos. Their creations are not relics. They are fresh, alive, endless. Helldrakes still shriek across the skies of loyalist worlds. Defilers still scuttle through the ruins of imperial bastions. Mauler fiends still rampage through shattered cities. New abominations, unseen even during the heresy, emerge daily. Hellforges churn out variants of demon engines faster than the Imperium can comprehend. The Adeptus Mechanicus repairs the past. The Dark Mechanicum creates the future, blasphemous, horrific, but new. And the rumors grow darker still. Whispers say the Dark Mechanicum has knowledge of the Golden Throne itself, that in their Heretech archives, deep within Hellforges hidden in the Eye, they preserve fragments of STCs, scraps of Dark Age technology, even data stolen from the Emperor's own vaults during the Schism of Mars. They claim that with this knowledge, they could repair the throne, or worse, destroy it. They do not speak this openly, but the Inquisition fears it. They whisper that if Abaddon ever demanded it, the Dark Mechanicum could build the key to unmake the Imperium. It is in this age that their role has shifted from hidden traitors to overt architects of chaos advance. During the Arcs of Omen campaigns, when Abaddon launched his most recent conquests, it was the Dark Mechanicum who supplied the Arcs themselves. These vast, nightmare warships, part fortress, part demon engine, part living weapon, were birthed in Hellforges beyond comprehension. They are not starships in the imperial sense. They are shrines, prisons, factories, and predators all at once. And only the Dark Mechanicum could have made them. Think on that. The Imperium still struggles to maintain its ancient fleets, patching battleships with rust and prayer. The Dark Mechanicum creates new gods of war, the size of continents, each one a singular heresy against logic. The balance of power is not preservation versus preservation. It is preservation versus invention. An invention, even damnable invention, is a tide that will not be held back forever. And so, in the grim darkness of the present, the Dark Mechanicum is not fading. It is resurgent. Its hellforges still churn. Its warpsmiths still bind demons into steel. Its machines still scream across every battlefield where chaos treads. They're the lifeblood of the long war, the architects of nightmares, the priests of a machine god who does not sleep, but hungers. Tell me, then, when the Imperium looks upon the battlefield and sees a hell drake tearing through its skies, or a defiler grinding loyal soldiers into ash, what is it truly fighting? A machine? A demon? Or the philosophy of the Dark Mechanicum itself, made flesh and iron? The answer is always the same. The Imperium fights its own reflection. For the Dark Mechanicum is not only chaos weapon, it is Mars' shadow, the proof of what happens when knowledge is freed from chains. And that shadow stretches long, from the burning of Mars to the burning of the galaxy. Segment 12. The eternal sin of Mars. They say sins can be buried, that with enough time, with enough silence, with enough prayer, even betrayal fades into memory. But Mars tells us otherwise. The red planet is not a graveyard where sins are forgotten. It is a forge where sins are remade. The Dark Mechanicum is proof of that truth, 10,000 years long. For what greater tragedy exists than this? Humanity's greatest keepers of knowledge, their priests of iron, their builders of titans, their guardians of the sacred relics of the dark age of technology, turn not into saviors, but into heretics. When the Emperor came to Mars, he promised unity, a future built on steel and faith alike. The Treaty of Mars was supposed to be a covenant that bound flesh and machine, Terra and the Forge, into one destiny. But the covenant broke. Pride shattered it. Fear poisoned it. Ambition damned it. The Dark Mechanicum is the scar left by that fracture. The Adeptus Mechanicus claims to be the true children of Mars, loyal and unyielding, preserving humanity's knowledge through the long night. Yet their very existence is defined by what they lost. Their reflection, their shadow, their eternal rival. The Dark Mechanicum is everything the Adeptus fears becoming, and everything it secretly knows it could still become again. Because look closely, what separates them? Both worship knowledge. Both treat the machine as sacred. Both bind their souls in ritual to technology they do not truly understand. The only difference is that the Adeptus Mechanicus fears change, and the Dark Mechanicum exalts in it. One clings to rusting relics, the other creates monstrosities. One prays to an absent god, the other prays to demons who answer. Both call themselves the true heirs of the machine god. Both are right, and both are wrong. This is the eternal sin of Mars, that in its betrayal, it revealed a truth the Imperium cannot bury, that knowledge is not pure, that faith is not safe, that the guardians of mankind's future are just as likely to damn it as to save it. Every time a demon engine strides across a battlefield, every time a hellforge births another abomination, every time a warpsmith binds another demon into iron, that sin echoes. The galaxy remembers. And what of the future? The Imperium whispers that the Dark Mechanicum may know the secrets of the Golden Throne itself, that in their archives they may hold the keys not only to the Emperor's survival, but to his undoing. Imagine that. The very heretics who betrayed Mars, who fused demons to machines, who screamed their defiance into the eye of terror, holding in their claws the power to end or remake the Imperium forever. Is that paranoia or prophecy? Perhaps the greatest cruelty of this tale is that the Dark Mechanicum does not see itself as damned. They do not see themselves as traitors, or monsters, or blasphemers. They see themselves as visionaries. To them, the Adeptus Mechanicus is a fossil, chained to fear, stagnant and rotting. They see themselves as the future, the only ones with the courage to create, to innovate, to embrace what the galaxy truly is. They are wrong, yes. They are damned. But in their damnation lies a spark of truth the Imperium dares not admit. And so, the war between loyal and heretic continues. 10,000 years have not erased it. 10,000 years will not. It is not a war of armies, or even of gods. It is a war of philosophy. One side says stasis is survival. The other says survival is only found in change. Between them, humanity drowns, caught between rust and fire. The Dark Mechanicum is not a faction to be destroyed. It is not a rebellion to be crushed. It is the wound of Mars itself, a shadow that cannot be banished, so long as the light of the Mechanicus burns. It is a mirror, and the Imperium cannot look away. So when next you see a helldrake shriek across the sky, or a defiler crawl from the smoke, or a corrupted titan stride with demon fire in its veins, remember this. You are not only looking at a weapon, you are looking at a truth. The truth that faith and knowledge alike can be corrupted, that the guardians of mankind's destiny can betray it, that Mars, the cradle of the machine god, gave birth not only to the Adeptus Mechanicus, but to its eternal shadow. This is the eternal sin of Mars, that in trying to guard humanity's future, its tech priests forged hell instead, and hell has marched beside us ever since.